All right, YouTube, I wanted to make this video yesterday, but unfortunately for the last couple days I've had a cold. That's why I wasn't online as much. I'm still getting over it now. My throat's not sore anymore, but I'm still a little bit under the weather, but I'll try to muddle through this. We all know Obama yesterday came out and did his NSA speech in which he proposed fixes for the NSA. Let's face it, it's a problem. He says to reform the agency or whatever to alleviate people's fears. The media jumped right on board, claiming that the main issue was the phone metadata, which is hardly all that the NSA does. For instance, Obama completely ignored the fact that the NSA sends agents out onto like World of Warcraft and Minecraft and shit like that to spy on people, make sure they're not talking about jihad, I guess, on online games. Because clearly Al-Qaeda agents frequently have, the type of computers and internet connection needed to play World of Warcraft when they're hiding out in caves or, in some small town in the desert in the Middle East. Clearly that's apparently the case. They completely ignored email search. The fact that they're archiving people's emails, which are private, they, let's face it, have a reasonable expectation of privacy. They ignored the fact that the NSA is working on tools to break all forms of encryption. Obama ignored the fact that the NSA has explicitly stated that anyone who's using encryption, they're specifically going to go after them. Obama proposed a very limited number of fixes. Oh, well, we won't spy on foreign heads of state. That's something I never really cared about. The foreign heads of state do, but that's not people living in this country. All countries do spy on foreign nations. I think it was a little odd we were spying on our close allies, but be that as it may, they're not protected by our own constitution because they're not citizens of this specific nation. And oh well, the NSA is no longer going to store these materials themselves. Instead, they're going to be stored off-site by private businesses. Now, this isn't going to help. The problem people have with what the NSA is doing is that they're storing this material in the first place, conducting surveillance on every man, woman, and child in the country. It doesn't matter who stores it. It doesn't matter if you store this at the White House or at the NSA's data centers, or you build a new center and put some other group in charge. It does not matter where they are storing this material, or if you have the phone companies do it themselves or whatever. That's not the issue. When Obama came out, when the Snowden stuff first started breaking, he lied straight-faced to the entire American public and said, no, we are not conducting surveillance on our population. The only purpose of this NSA program, this is what he said at the time when he didn't realize Snowden had much more info to dump. He said the only purpose is to collect metadata specifically for people that are calling suspicious numbers abroad. We found out that is a total lie. When Pelosi and Boehner and all of these others have come out and said they largely, both sides of the aisle, largely supported the NSA before fairly recently, the last few months, when more and more info started coming out, people got more and more concerned. They said, well, it stopped. Pelosi said, well, it stopped at least 2 terrorist attacks. Boehner said, half a dozen. And then Clapper came out and said 50. And then somebody said 500. They can't get the number straight because there is no number. It stopped 0 terrorist attacks. If you think that it stopped terrorist attacks, you should go call Obama or email him or something and ask him to give specific examples because the rest of us would really like to know. So it's clear that this program has been misused. It's clear that Obama and everyone else backing it has lied repeatedly about the scope of what's actually going on. And Obama comes out and expects us to magically trust him when he says, I'll reform people are worried, so I'll reform the program a little. It's not helping. It's too little, it's too late, and it's completely off mark. He's ignoring 99% of what the NSA is doing and focusing just on metadata. And he says, well, they'll have to get a court warrant. Well, they already have to get a court warrant. What he means by that is that they'll continue to get more warrants from those secret courts, which, by the way, are dubiously constitutional to begin with, continue to get warrants from those secretive courts that aren't beholden to the public. You don't even necessarily know who's on these courts. They're beholden to no one. And he says, oh, well, Congress will take a better role. That's great. The problem being the people in Congress largely voted against Amash. It's clear that these people, they had one story on it about how defense spending in a state was an indicator of whether they voted for the amendment or not. You know, if you can get 51% of the Congress to be corrupt for you, you don't have anything to worry about. It's clear they're not going to do anything about it because anyone who raises any red flags, they're quickly going to get squished out and probably not reelected. This is too little, too late, and off mark. He's ignoring most of the issues that people actually cared about. Myself, I don't even have a cell phone. As far as I'm concerned, the metadata for me in my personal life is a moot point. I'm more worried about email. I play Minecraft. I'm assuming that I'm being spied on by the NSA there. All these griefers are probably NSA agents. They're getting 50, 100 bucks an hour to go grief my friggin' fortress out in the middle of the desert, which is surrounded by cactuses probably, and to spawn creepers in it, you know, sort of wage sort of bizarre jihad on my Minecraft base and dig up all my carrots and wheat and shit, which is a funny thing to think about, but that's what they're getting paid for. Obama stood up there and said, well, as I said before, these programs aren't being misused. There's no abuse. But we know that's not true. Only the public's limited attention span has saved him from most people knowing that this is even a story. But Google it. Love-int. L-O-V-E-I-N-T. Google NSA Love-int. And you'll find the story. NSA agents were spying on their spouses and friends and ex-girlfriends and things like that, and they were marking it down as training. They were marking it down as a search in error, done in error. And they got away with it. They weren't fired. They misused the NSA's spying capabilities to pull up personal, intimate details on their ex-wives and things like that. They should have been fired and they should have been thrown in jail for doing such a thing. It's clearly stalking. It's clearly a crime. It's also clearly unconstitutional that they would have the power to do this without an actual honest-to-goodness public court issuing a specific warrant for a specific individual to search specific info on them. It's clearly unlawful. People just didn't notice this story because it got buried by other stories at the time. And I wish they would rerun that story because people would say, wow, it's much worse than we thought. This is the equivalent. What Obama's speech is the equivalent of is, imagine Obama's a fire chief, runs a fire department, and a house is burning. And people are calling them up. Okay, well, we'll do something about that. A week later, after the house is already a pile of smoldering debris, they go to the neighbor's house and start squirting squirt guns at it. That's the equivalent of what Obama has just done here. And he's managed to delude at least part of the public into thinking that this is an okay fix for a much larger problem. You're ignoring the main problem. You're doing very little about peripheral issues that fewer people actually care about. And none of the fixes are actually going to do anything in the first place. He is, again, squirting your squirt gun at the house that didn't burn down and completely ignoring the one next to it that's still smoldering. That's what Obama did. No, I'm not just going to trust Obama because he says, oh, well, it's not being abused, everything's fine. Nothing to see here, folks. I'll reform the NSA despite the fact that I was the one that expanded it in the first place. It couldn't be that he's stalling for time, you know, pending the midterm elections because he's honestly terrified of getting impeached because if the Republicans take that extra seat in the Senate, he probably would be with his approval that low. No, I'm not going to trust a word that Obama says. He did lie. He lied to us about the NSA. Both sides of the aisle lied. Boehner lied just as much as Pelosi. All of these people lied to us. And they fixated on a few smaller issues like metadata collection, which it's literally is just metadata, instead of focusing on emails where they're collecting the entire summation of the email plus any pictures and attachments and links and anything you've ever said into their gigantic archive database. They focused on foreign heads of state, but they didn't focus on the issue of domestically, this is an unconstitutional thing that's happening. Instead, they would rather focus on foreign heads of state and metadata, which are unconstitutional. Well, the metadata, you can argue, one federal judge says it was, one federal judge says it wasn't. So you can argue either way there. But as far as foreign heads of state goes, nobody gives a fuck. Even people who had been calling out the NSA said this is little more than a distraction. Primarily, let's assume, used by Snowden to provoke ire at the American government by its close allies, which is a good tactical move, I guess. I think it might have been a bad idea to release that specific gem of info at that specific time. I think it should focus Snowden and Greenwald and so forth need to focus more on the domestic surveillance because let's face it, Snowden's nowhere near done dumping documents. There's going to be more and more and more. Every week or so, you see something else, something good, that hits the mainstream media. It's going to be a continual pounding from here to midterms. I think that's his goal. I think it's a laudable goal. And here's the thing. The same people being deluded by Obama's speech into thinking that everything's okay and that magically this tiny fix is going to fix the issue. It won't, but the people who are deluded into thinking that are the same type of people who ignore the fact that it took two parties over a decade to erect the system. The NSA surveillance started under Bush. I've admitted this before, I've said it before, it started under Bush, who was a Republican, a neocon, not necessarily a crazed right-wing evangelical, a routine garden variety neoconservative. It started under him. Yes, that's true. Obama expanded it many, many times over and apparently gave it all these different goals, supposedly modernizing the system. In reality, all he's done is give them free rein to abuse the entire domestic population. That's the truth of the NSA. Nothing short at this point of stripping it of all of its powers and letting Congress do a complete and thorough overview of each individual program that the NSA is administering would work. Nothing short of that. I would even go so far as to say to get rid of the NSA entirely, then go through all of these programs, dump the archives, just throw them in a giant microwave and fucking fry them, and replace it with something that is constitutional, that is lawful, overseen by an actual court, one where we know who's in it, overseen by Congress, and preferably also a panel of citizens. Regular people who would then be able to, people who are in law most likely, former judges or whatever, people who could oversee this and say, yes, this is acceptable. No, that's not acceptable. Here's why. Here's a suggestion of how to replace it with something that would probably work better. And you've got people from the intelligence community itself, including the former head of the NSA himself, saying, this is ridiculous. It's not going to work because you've got all of this archived data that you then have to sift through. But they don't have quantum computers yet, or so we at least hope. It's ridiculous. This isn't going to help stop terrorism. You stop terrorism by, number one, if a citizen sees someone with wires sticking out of their shoes screaming "Al Akbar," they fucking shoot them in the head. That'll stop terrorism. Number two, you could stop allowing people from these regions of the world, specifically people who you know have jihadist sentiments, from moving in the first place, and tell our close neighbors to not let them in there either. It's an easy fix. And let's face it, you're never going to do away completely with these jihadists and extremists and so forth. You're never going to get rid of them all. They're always going to exist. They've always existed before. Our actions following in the wake of World War II have helped make them grow, if anything, in Iran, in Iraq, and elsewhere. Our own funding of these groups in some cases, giving them money, giving them arms, giving them logistic support, giving them moral support. Reagan coming out and saying, well, the Taliban is the equivalent of America's founding fathers. We need to give them more guns and ammo and things like that because they're fighting the Soviet Union. Well, it's no wonder these groups are swimming in ammunition and weapons because you gave them truckload after truckload of these materials during the Cold War. That's why these people have power. We helped support them. Until they turned on us, now they're terrible, and we've got to lose our freedom as a result. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If the terrorist goal is to destroy our freedom because they hate it, then they've won. Because we've essentially squished out the Constitution trying to combat the same groups that we ourselves funded in the first place. Not really we, because the American people were oblivious to this fact. No, the CIA and the NSA and the president and some upper-level people in Congress with security clearance, they all knew it was going on. It's no different than the Iran-Contra affair. It's no different. overthrowing legitimate democratic regimes to put in tin horn puppets, which then magically, two decades later, they go haywire and they start forming militant groups and they start attacking us. Well, I wonder why that could be. Could it be because we were meddling in their governments in the first place? We don't have anything to fear from the garden variety terrorist. What the hell are they going to do to us? We've got, unless they get a hold of a couple hundred nukes, they're not going to be able to really damage us. If we want to worry about that, then we need to focus on things like the nuclear power industry. Remember when that van down in Mexico got hijacked and had highly toxic radioactive waste in the back, and they hijacked it. That doesn't sound like they had very good security on that particular truck, and that could have been perhaps weaponized into a dirty bomb. And they hijacked it. Regular street criminals. These weren't even terrorists. They apparently didn't even know what was in it. And they hijacked it without firing a shot. This is the real problem. If you want to, you can't keep people totally safe. The best thing that you can hope for is a little bit of common sense in our government to help us out. Right now with the NSA, that does not seem to be the case. That's about all. Peace out.